So welcome. It's Happy Memorial Day weekend. If we have any veterans that are here, thank you so much for your service. And I hope you'll enjoy this story. And at the end, I'm going to try to unmute everybody. So if anybody has stories about their family veterans or they told you what they did during the war, it'd be really wonderful if you want to share it. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So hopefully in a second, you are going to all be seeing the lead slide. So maybe somebody can nod if you're seeing that, so I'll know that it's working. Okay, great. Okay, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Sam Bierstock. I have had a very eclectic, unusual career, which I'm going to tell you about because it's a little necessary for me to do that for you'll understand how this all unfolded. But I started my professional career actually as an electrical engineer and became a physician and an ophthalmic surgeon. And I'm going to tell you how this whole situation unfolded with the development of this song, which gave me the very unique capability of actually thanking over 25 million people for their service as veterans. So that was quite a remarkable thing, and it continues to this day. So it's a very unique honor for me. I want to share with you what I think is really a kind of an incredible story about how this all unfolded, and it happened because of a completely chance encounter with a very despondent veteran, and resulted in that encounter having been able to reach more than 25 million people with a message of thanks. So it's been really quite a wonderful thing. And at the end, as I said, I'll try to unmute everybody so we can have some participation if somebody's got their own stories about their own family. So I have to tell you a little bit about myself and how this happened. I have had, as I said, a very eclectic career, which is either the most eclectic career in existence or the world's longest identity crisis. I've never really been certain of which one it was. It gave me the opportunity to draw a little timeline for myself. As I said, I started as an electrical engineer, became a physician and an ophthalmic surgeon, and because I was very involved with computers, then early on I became something of a physician computer specialist in the 80s when it wasn't being done. And because of that, I was helping my colleagues. I was the president of our medical staff. I was helping the doctors computerize. Did that through the 80s, and that sort of developed into a speaking career where I was doing a lot of writing and speaking on the subject. And at the same time, I was practicing. And I was really overwhelmed. I had two careers going. I was seeing sometimes 80 people a day in my office. Many 18-hour days. I had a large staff and building, and I just basically burned out. And this was somewhere in my early 40s, and a whole series of events happened which made me make the decision to leave practice and have a consulting career, which I did through the 90s. I really didn't enjoy it very much. I used that time to become a ski instructor and do a whole bunch of other things I wanted to do in life. But one of the things, and that went on from there, I became a chief medical officer of several very large entities and national companies, and started my own eventually, which was a consulting company. But somewhere here in the 90s, I remember very clearly coming back from a consulting engagement. I'd really not enjoyed myself. Driving back from the airport thinking, what do I want to do? This is not fun. And I had sort of I won't say semi-professionally, but I had played the harmonica, blues harmonica, for many years. And I thought, well, how can I do something in music, which is what I really want to do, and still be in healthcare? And I came up with what seemed to me to be a very crazy idea, which was to perform at healthcare events and do it in a way that was entertaining, because this was during the managed care years, and everybody hated managed care. The doctors hated it, the patients hated it, the public hated it, because the idea was for the healthcare companies and the doctors to do as little care as possible. They actually got paid more the less they did. It was very bizarre. So I named the band Dr. Sam and the Managed Care Blues Band. Thought it was just an absolutely crazy idea at the time, and I thought it was nothing more than that. And I came up with crazy song titles. As I said, the plan was to entertain at healthcare conventions, and I came up with these song titles. You picked a fine time to leave me, Blue Shield. Sorry, man, but your bypass is considered cosmetic. Your one-hit mama because they won't pay for two. Back spasm woman, just crazy titles. So on a complete lark, I had a professional picture taken with sunglasses as make it farcical, and I sent it to Modern Healthcare magazine, really as a joke. Modern Healthcare magazine put it on the last page of one of their issues, buried among 7 or 8 other articles. And so you really didn't see it. It just happened to be on the back page. Well, one of the people that happened to see it was a reporter from USA Today. So the next thing I know, I get a call from USA Today that they want to do a feature article on me. Well, this was pretty exciting. They called me and we did the interview. And the only problem was I had nothing. I had no music. I had no recordings. I had no songs. I had some crazy song titles. That's absolutely all I had. And all of a sudden, I'm in USA Today. Now I'm getting deluged by emails and calls, and people want my CDs to hear these songs. I had no CDs and I had no songs. I threw together a bunch of local musicians who were good. They weren't professionals, but they were good. Ran into the studio, and over the next 6 weeks, ended up with my first CD, which looked like this, and started taking orders. I hired a secretary, and we're taking 100 orders a day for a CD and telling everybody we're back ordered. There was no CD. So anyway, really scrambled and ended up with this CD, which we were able to start selling. The next thing I know, I get a call from People magazine, and that's followed by levels of media that people in the entertainment world can only hope for and pray for. And for me, it just fell in my lap. So suddenly I'm in People magazine, the same issue that featured the ending of the Seinfeld series. And on the cover of any number of magazines, I couldn't possibly describe them or show them. But this one I showed because it sort of summarized the satire, which was the doctor trying to do nothing except carry around a little harmonica and hiring people to do everything else. There's one guy that played 100 instruments. So it was a farce on the idea of physicians doing less and less, but using paramedical people because that's what managed care was giving us. So this character, Dr. Sam, was trying to manage the music industry. And this just mushroomed. Suddenly we're featured on CNN, Fox Healthcare News, Fox TV, National Public Radio, just on and on and on, and just massive publicity, which led to another problem because of the caliber of the band. And what happened was that the band that I had did not like my drummer, who was a close friend of mine. The drummer finally called me and said, Sam, you've got a good thing going here, but I'm your weakest link. You need a better drummer. So I brought in a top-level pro drummer, and he said, these other guys are no good. And the next thing I know, he brings in his guys, and now I've got Bruce Springsteen's keyboard player, Santana's conga player. My guitar and bass player was on every Bee Gees hit you ever heard and toured with Joe Cocker and Paul Butterfield. Anyway, these are top-level pros, so it became a great band. If you're interested and you want to go to managemusic.com, there are videos there of the band performing and lots of the songs that I mentioned before that did eventually evolve into songs. And we had a lot of fun with them. We toured the country over the next 10 years. We're in over 40 states and had a wonderful time, became good friends, started getting feedback from very unexpected letter. Here's a letter from Bill Clinton, who enjoyed the band, and we used to kid about having him come in as a saxophone player. Al Gore, Greg Gansky, who was in the Senate at the time, at the House of Representatives, asked me for 435 CDs. He gave one to every member of Congress. That ended up with a feature article in Hill magazine, which is the publication that goes to Congress. And as a result of that, we performed in Washington several times. I produced 3 more CDs over the years. And this is a guitar I made as another farce for Dr. Sam, which I call Lucille. If you look closely, you'll see it's made out of a bedpan. It actually ended up being a terrific sounding guitar, which I still play and enjoy and use it when we do have events. But this ended up with our touring in Congress and in Washington more than once, being part of the national events. So anyway, that takes me to the point of having a band that was successful and traveling around the country. At this point, the most meaningful thing happened, which is that I was coming back from an event in California. I arrived at the West Palm Airport about 1 in the morning. And in those days, you still had people taking the tolls. And I was leaving, and there was an elderly man collecting the tolls, and I paid him. And I said, "Have a nice evening." And he said, "I took 2 bullets for this country, and look what I'm doing." And I had already started to drive away. And I stopped, and I realized what had happened and what he had said. And I backed up, and I said, "Sir, I've had a wonderful life in this country. Thank you for what you did." And he began to cry. I left. I was haunted by this experience all the way home. I really couldn't sleep that night. And I had what I call my Paul McCartney moment. Not that I have anywhere near the talent of Paul McCartney, but Paul McCartney always said he wrote yesterday in his sleep. He woke up in the morning, wrote it down, ended up being the most heavily covered song, I think, in history. This literally happened to me. I was lying in bed, some lyrics came into my head, and I wrote them down in the morning in about 20 minutes. It just wasn't any longer than that. And I couldn't think of the music. I couldn't put it to the kind of music that it needed to be. I didn't know if it was a ballad. I didn't know if it was a Western song. I just couldn't go there. I sent it off to, the lyrics off to many well-known, very famous music writers. Artie Butler, who's a very prolific writer of Hollywood Broadway productions. David Foster, who many of you may know, is a very, very famous. He did The Prayer, which you may have heard with Celine Dion and Andrea Bocelli, among many other things. Marvin Hamlish, who I talked to several times about it. And the consensus I got back from these people was very nice lyrics, but it's really a poem. We can't see where it's going to go to music. So I didn't do anything for almost 2 years. And that's when I had my second really fateful encounter as a result of a tragedy. Because what happened was our keyboard player named Jared Brothier, a very talented guy, was killed in a car accident. And he happened to be killed about 3 days before I was to go to Philadelphia with the band for a very big event, almost 1,000 people, for a major pharmaceutical company, and our keyboard player was killed. So I called up the guys in the band and I said, "Guys, what are we going to do?" They said, "Do not worry." One of the guys said, "Do not worry, I have a guy." I said, "Well, that's nice, but what are we going to do? No rehearsals. We haven't got time to rehearse. He's not going to know the cues. He's not going to know the lyrics. What are we going to do?" They said, "Do not worry, we got a guy." So I said, "Okay, off we go to Philadelphia with this guy that I didn't know from Adam. Did not know they told me he was a top level pro, but I didn't know. And that guy was a fellow named John Melnick. So we land in Philadelphia. We're on our way to the Lemos because we were being picked up by Lemos to go to this event. And John and I are strolling along together. And I said, "John, I've got these lyrics. I don't know what to do with them. I've been sitting on them for 2 years." And he said, "Send them to me. We'll see what I can do." We do the event. I can't believe this guy. I mean, he's never played with a band before. He just was fantastic musician, great vocalist. It was just all second nature to him, right off the cuff. And a week later, he calls me and he says, "Sam, can I come up to your studio? I want to play I think I've got some music here." So I said, "Sure, come on up." And he comes up and plays what he thinks will be applicable music. And I said, "John, you nailed it. I mean, it was just really, really great. So we record the song, and I got the idea of putting it to pictures, which in those days really hadn't been done. I was later told it was the first time anybody ever did a music video, but I don't know that that's really true, but it was certainly early. And we put the song on the internet together with the visual that I created. And I worked very hard on that visual because I tried to represent all the services that serve in the Army, both sexes, all the races, all the religions. It was quite a task. Anyway, first week it's on the internet. I called John. John, it's been played 100 times. I couldn't believe it. We were both very excited. The next week I called him, John, it's been played 500 times. We're both scratching our heads. Within 1 month, it was being played 50,000 times a day. At the time, I was paying $100 a month for my internet service provider, which was called Cybergate. In those days, it wasn't tied in with a cellular service. I get my bill after the first month. It's $20,000 for internet service. So I started to laugh. I said, that's a crazy mistake. I called them up and I said, I'm laughing on the phone to them. I said, guys, you send me a bill for $20,000. I pay $100 a month. They said, yeah, it's $20,000. Your song has had more traffic in a month than all of our other clients combined. I said, no, I can't do this. This is not a money-making venture. This is a tribute song, and we're doing out of our own, not making money here. Went back and forth. To make a very long story short, when they heard what the project was, they agreed to take $1,000 for that month, which I was very relieved by. And the song continued to proliferate on its own, and so that we stopped counting the number of times it had been played in 2013, at which time it was estimated to have been played more than 25 million times. It just went worldwide, and I started getting email from veterans and their families that were so moving. And I got so many that I actually produced a book for the first year of email only, which is over 200 pages of email from people, many of them only a line or two long. People saying, my father never talked about the war. He saw your song. He's now talking about it and telling us what happened. That was sort of a recurring theme. One of the most moving, which I actually stopped production of the book to be sure got in, was a woman wrote and said her husband, who was almost completely deaf, was lying in bed, and she was playing the song on her computer, and she looked over her shoulder, and he was standing behind her, looking at the computer and saluting. We just got so many incredibly moving emails. It's just a little bit hard to describe the magnitude of it. It became a wonderful venture, and the number of people that contributed. Cybergate, as I mentioned, reduced their fee. I called the Associated Press. I was very worried because I was stealing pictures off the internet, many of which were copyrighted, and I called them and said, look, this is what I'm doing. Do I have to pay you for it? They talked among themselves and called me back and said, no, we love what you're doing. You're not going to hear from us. Just use any pictures you want. My webmaster, a woman named Pat Levinson, created the website, the fulfillment process, put tremendous amount of time in, very often for many hours without being paid. The PR people did the same, gave us concessions. Photographers, one photographer said his grandfather had served and couldn't possibly charge. Then I started hearing from prominent people. Ross Perot called me. That was a little bit of a story. I was sitting in the restaurant with Pat Levinson, a very noisy restaurant, and I have very bad hearing from the result of my activities over the years. And I hear a man say, that was the greatest song to my generation that I ever heard. And I said, well, thank you. And we chatted, and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. He told me his name again, I didn't hear it. We're talking 3 or 4 times. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. And suddenly he's yelling in the phone, R-O-S-S-P-E-R-O-T. I said, Mr. Perot. So I took the phone out of the restaurant. We had a very nice talk. I ended up, at his invitation, coming to his offices in Texas and spending a day with him. I cannot tell you, this was the most down-to-earth man I ever met in my life. Politics notwithstanding, we didn't even talk about politics, but a wonderful man. I can't even begin to tell you how gracious he was. I was on crutches. I had broke my leg on a ski trip, and I was supposed to see him at 3 in the afternoon. I arrived at 11 a.m. and I couldn't navigate around Dallas or where we were, so I called his secretary to say, I'm in the waiting room. Don't worry, I'll wait. I've got a computer. And that was 11 a.m. Next thing I know, a door flies open. Out comes Ross Perot, grabs my briefcase, takes me to the cafeteria, grabs a tray, makes my salad for me. You know, do you want tomatoes? Do you want this? Made a whole meal for me. We sat and talked for an hour. It was wonderful. And when it came time to leave, and we spent a lot of time together, he arranged for a taxi to come to a special area, carried my briefcase to the car, opened the door for me. It just went, and subsequently he asked for hundreds of CDs to hand out. So very, very helpful. The ex-governor of California contacted me. At the time, he was the president of the board of the World War II Museum. And he had the World War II Museum playing it in the background for many, many weeks until all the employees became so sick of it they had to stop it. But he was very supportive. Senators, Joe Lieberman, Tom Dreesen, who's a Hollywood personality and comedian, you may or may not have seen him. He often substituted for David Letterman. He opened for Sinatra on the Rat Pack for 15 years. He helped me, got the song to people like Clint Eastwood and Gary Sinise and many, many other people. Bob Gould was a DJ on Veterans Radio. Anyway, many, many people helped with the process of getting this message to so many people. And to give you an idea of the publicity, this is a sampling of the sorts of attention we got and opportunities to perform features in major, major national print media, on every major network, cable network, and this is a sampling of the radio features and interviews. So it went very far, very fast, and reached a tremendous number of people, which was a great honor for me and very gratifying. We performed it in Washington at the Capitol more than once, as part of the National Memorial Day services, as I said, on Fox TV, and it was played around the country at veterans honor ceremonies, in churches, at funerals, a lot at funerals. We got a lot of requests for CDs to play at funerals. And many veterans said they wanted it played at their funeral. Choral groups, community gatherings, Holocaust Remembrance Day. These were some of the most absolutely emotionally draining performances. And I have to tell you, John and I, whenever we performed it, we would ask if there were veterans in the audience, and we'd bring them up front, seat them. Many of the times they were in wheelchairs or with walkers. And the emotions were so high in that audience. There would be a standing ovation. It was not for John and me. It was for these veterans. It would go on for 5 minutes. John and I, more than once, barely made it through the song. We would look at each other, and the response of the audience to these vets, and we'd both be crying. I'd look at Johnny, he had tears coming down his face. He'd be looking at me, and I'd be trying to play the harmonica in the same state. It was just so emotional. Holocaust Remembrance Days really stand out in my mind because these were the people who were so grateful to the veterans who freed them from the camps. So when we had veterans there, they just would be such an outpouring of emotion. And importantly, it was being used in schools to teach history. So I hope this gives you a sampling of what an enormous honor it is for me to have reached so many people and have this song meant so much to them. This is, I don't know if you can read this. This is a letter I got from George Bush, who wrote to tell me that he and Barbara had watched it with tears in their eyes and how much they appreciated it. George W. Bush wrote also thanking me for honoring his father and other veterans. John McCain, this was my day with Ross Perot. This picture on the lower left was quite a day for me. I don't know how many of you know the story of the sinking of the Indianapolis. The Indianapolis was a ship that delivered the atomic bomb to the island of Tinian in the South Pacific. And that's where they took off to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. And on the way back from dropping it off, they requested anti-submarine escort. And the Navy said, no, there's no submarines in the area. And they didn't get the escort. Of course, they were sunk by a Japanese submarine. In the middle of the Pacific, something like 1,300 men went in the water. 300 or so survived, 318 to be precise survived. They were in the water for 5 days. The rest were eaten by sharks. It is the most harrowing story you can imagine. They were clinging onto rafts, and the man beside them would be pulled down by a shark and eaten right in front of them. And this happened over 5 days. They were spread out over several hundred miles by the time they were finally discovered. And I was asked to perform the song and come and speak to the 21 remaining survivors of the Indianapolis who were well enough to attend. This is me way over on the far right, but these are these 21 men. It was quite an emotional experience. Many stories I could tell around their experience. I met men who no one knew what PTSD was in those days. And one man told me, everyone said they're shell shocked. That's all they say about them having served. And one man told me he had been waking up screaming every night for 70 years. Just out of a solid sleep, he'd wake up screaming. If it hadn't been for his wife, he said he would have been dead years ago. I met men who were captured by cannibals in the South Pacific and saved from the headhunters and saved from the Japanese. This is a guy named Ola Lee Mays. He was a veteran of the Korean War and Vietnam. The Medal of Honor recipient. He single-handedly saved the entire battalion of men. He grabbed a enemy submachine gun post and killed something like 15 attacking enemy. At the same time, he killed another one who was just about to shoot one of his comrades in the head. He was quite a guy if you ever read about him. And this is me with him in his home near the end of his life. And on the right, this is Erwin Stovroff. Became a close friend. Erwin was a Jewish prisoner of war in Germany, if you can imagine. Had a story he always told. He always cried when he told me. He was lined up by the Germans with 40 or 50 other prisoners. The Germans said, all Jews take 2 steps forward. And Erwin said, without a word being said, every man there stepped forward 2 steps and saved the lives of the Jewish POWs. And he would cry when he told me that story. The experiences of these men were really, really something. As I said, this is the picture of the book. It's about 200 pages, and only the first year's worth of email. Over the years, there are thousands that were never included in any kind of printed format. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. And for those of you that haven't heard it, and then maybe I'll try to unmute everybody, and if anybody has anything to say, I'd love to hear it. So here we go, and I hope you enjoy it, and send it on to any veterans that you think today and this weekend would like to hear it, and their family. It should play through your speakers. I hope it does.
Quietly, you've all turned gray. You did your job, you saved our way. Our life and freedom you preserved. We've thanked you less than you deserve. You never boasted, bragged, or asked for adulation for your past. You did the job you knew was right, and quietly you cry at night for bodies maimed and comrades lost, for sights beyond our furthest thoughts, for what you lived and felt and seen, for what the cost of freedom means. You leave us blessed with every breath that cost you arms and legs and death. You won the worst and greatest war. We owe you more, we owe you more. Thank you for your wondrous feats, for hope and speech and quiet streets.
that's it. And it still makes me emotional for some reason to see it. I've heard it many thousands of times. I will tell you that when I was first put it on the web, I wanted to copyright it. I took it to my attorney, and he listened to it and started to cry. So I figured if I made a lawyer cry, I'd probably got something here. And it seems to have that effect on many people. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and if I can not mess up anything too much, I'm going to try to unmute everybody, and if anybody has anything to say or tell any stories about their families, I'd love to hear them. I'm just going to say thank you. It's wonderful to have some really close friends here joining to see this and be able to tell them how this wonderful thing happened for me. So unless anybody else has got something to say, I think I'll just say goodbye and wish everybody a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. And if you think anybody that you know would enjoy hearing the song, please feel free to send them the link. There's a version there, as you can see. Actually, you can't see because I have to share the screen. I'll do that in 1 second. There's a version for the Vietnam vets, which is basically the same song with a couple of lyric changes, and very meaningful to the Vietnam vets because no one thanked them for anything, basically. They had a terrible time when they came home, as you probably know. People were spitting on them, and they went through a lot of emotional and physical hell. So we did a version for them as well. So please feel free to send beforeyougo.us on to anybody. And thank you so much for being part of this. And I'm going to sign off and just say thanks and have a wonderful weekend. Okay. Thank you again. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.